The ballroom fell silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence where people pause to admire something beautiful, but the suffocating kind that makes your skin crawl and your stomach drop to your feet. I stood there in the center of the Harrington Estate's grand hall, my second-hand dress torn at the shoulder, mud splattered across the hem, like evidence of some crime I didn't commit. 200 pairs of eyes burned into me like hot coals, pressed against bare skin. The crystal chandeliers above cast harsh shadows across faces I didn't recognize, faces twisted with curiosity and judgment. My hands trembled at my sides as I tried to understand what was happening. Mrs. Victoria Harrington stood on the elevated platform near the orchestra, her diamond-draped finger pointed at my chest like a weapon designed specifically to pierce through whatever dignity I had left. Her voice carried across the marble floors with the authority of someone who had never been questioned, never been denied. "This girl," she announced, her tone dripping with disgust, "broke into my home earlier today. She attacked my staff, destroyed property, and now she has the audacity to show up at my son's engagement party, pretending to be someone she's not." My throat closed. The words I desperately needed wouldn't come. I opened my mouth to protest, to scream the truth that was choking me from the inside. But nothing emerged except a strangled sound that made me sound guilty. The crowd pressed closer, their expensive perfumes and colognes mixing into a nauseating cloud that made my head spin. "Security!" Mrs. Harrington shrieked, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. But it was Elijah who stepped forward before the guards could reach me. Elijah Harrington, the man whose son I had pulled from a burning car just 3 months ago. The man who had looked me in the eyes at the hospital with tears streaming down his face and promised he would never forget what I had done. The man who had handed me an envelope with $50,000 and told me to call him if I ever needed anything. He looked at me now with cold, empty eyes that held no recognition, no warmth, no humanity. The transformation was so complete, it felt like looking at a stranger wearing Elijah's face. "I don't know this woman," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I've never seen her before in my life." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps rippled through the crowd, like a wave crashing against rocks. Whispers spread like wildfire, each person turning to their neighbor to share their shock and speculation. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere in the back, cruel and sharp. My legs buckled beneath me, but I locked my knees and refused to fall. I couldn't fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who were already convinced I was nothing. How did I get here? How did saving a child's life, doing the right thing without expecting anything in return, turn into this nightmare? And why? Why was the one man who knew the truth now destroying me in front of everyone who mattered? I opened my mouth again to scream the truth, to force them to listen, but a security guard's hand clamped down on my arm. His grip was cold and unyielding, fingers digging into my flesh, hard enough to leave bruises. "Wait," I gasped, trying to pull away. But his partner had already grabbed my other arm. "Please, just listen to me." No one waited. No one listened. As they dragged me toward the gilded doors, my feet scrambling for purchase on the polished floor, I caught sight of her. Simone, my cousin, standing beside Elijah's mother near the champagne fountain, a crystal flute in her manicured hand, and a smile on her perfectly painted lips. A smile I had seen 1,000 times, growing up during family dinners, holiday gatherings, Sunday services. But never like this. Never this sharp, this triumphant, this full of satisfaction. She raised her glass slightly in my direction, a mock toast that only I could see. And in that moment, everything clicked into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a case of mistaken identity. This was a plan, carefully orchestrated and perfectly executed, and I had walked right into it, like a lamb to slaughter. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow could have. My own blood had set this trap. My own family had sold me out. The security guards hauled me through the doors and out into the cold night air. Rain had started falling, cold drops that felt like tiny needles against my skin. They threw me down onto the gravel driveway without ceremony, without care. I landed hard, my palms scraping against the sharp stones, my dress tearing further. The massive front doors of the Harrington estate slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. I knelt there on the wet gravel, rain soaking through my clothes and mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back anymore. And I screamed, not from physical pain, though my hands were bleeding and my knees were scraped raw. I screamed from the rage and betrayal and complete helplessness that consumed me. My name is Nalani Brooks, and I had been invisible my whole life. Not literally, of course, but close enough that it made little difference. I grew up in the Eastbrook projects on the south side of the city, a place where hope came in short supply and dreams died young. I was raised by my grandmother, Cecile Brooks, after my mother passed away from pneumonia when I was 6 years old. I barely remembered my mother now, just fragments of memories. Her laugh, the way she smelled like cocoa butter and vanilla, the style she used to sing while braiding my hair. Grandma Cecile became everything to me after that. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, to make sure I had food and clothes and a roofing over my head. She cleaned rooms at the Riverside Hotel downtown, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets for tourists who never bothered to learn her name. On weekends, she cooked meals at Bishop Freeman's church, feeding hundreds of congregation members after Sunday service. And at night, when most people were sleeping, she folded laundry at the county hospital, her arthritic hands working through mountains of sheets and scrubs until dawn. She never complained, not once. Not when her feet swelled so badly she could barely walk, not when her back ached so much she had to sleep sitting up, not when she missed my school plays and parent-teacher conferences because she was working. "Baby," she would tell me every morning before school, her weathered hands cupping my face with such tenderness it made my heart ache. "We may not have much, but we got dignity. Don't ever let nobody take that from you." I believed her with every fiber of my being. I believed in dignity, in hard work, in doing right by people, even when they couldn't do right by you. That belief almost killed me. I was 23 years old when everything started, when my life took the turn that would lead me to that rainy driveway. I had just finished community college with a certificate in early childhood education, a degree I had worked 3 years to earn while juggling 2 part-time jobs. I found work at Little Lamb's Daycare, a small facility on the edge of the projects that served working families who couldn't afford the fancy preschools in the suburbs. The pay was terrible, barely above minimum wage, and the hours were long, but I loved those kids with everything I had. They were pure and honest and full of possibility, untouched by the cynicism and cruelty of the adult world, especially Caleb Harrington. He was 4 years old when I met him, with bright brown eyes that sparkled with curiosity and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. His nanny, Miss Phyllis, dropped him off every morning at 7 sharp. She was a kind woman in her 60s, with gray hair always pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that seemed perpetually exhausted. "That family runs her ragged," my coworker Janelle whispered to me one day during nap time, jerking her head toward where Miss Phyllis sat in the waiting area, her shoulders slumped with fatigue. The Harringtons. Billionaires. They own half the commercial real estate in the city. But you'd never know it by how they treat their help. I didn't care about the family or their money or their real estate empire. I cared about Caleb, this sweet little boy who would sit in my lap during story time, his small hand holding mine with complete trust. "Miss Nalani," he would say in his high, clear voice, "you're my favorite teacher in the whole world." Those words meant everything to me, more than any paycheck ever could. Then came the Tuesday that changed my life forever. It was late June, the kind of oppressive heat that made the asphalt shimmer and the air feel thick enough to choke on. I had just gotten off my shift at 3 in the afternoon and was walking toward the bus stop, my mind already on the grocery shopping I needed to do before heading to my evening shift at the diner. That's when I heard it. A scream, high-pitched, desperate, full of terror, that made my blood run cold. I turned around, scanning the parking lot, and that's when I saw it. A black SUV with smoke pouring from under the hood, the driver's side door hanging wide open. Miss Phyllis was on the pavement beside it, sobbing hysterically, her hands covered in blood from where she had tried to break the window. "Caleb," she screamed, her voice breaking. "He's still inside. The door's jammed. I can't get him out." I didn't think. There was no time for thinking, no time for weighing risks or considering consequences. I just ran. My feet pounded against the hot pavement as I sprinted toward the vehicle, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribcage. The heat hit me like a physical wall when I reached the car, waves of scorching air that made my eyes water and my skin feel like it was burning. Flames were licking at the front seats, orange and hungry, spreading faster than seemed possible. Caleb was in the back, strapped into his car seat, his face red from crying and screaming. His little fists beat against the window as he saw me. "Miss Nalani, help me. Please help me." The sound of his terrified voice cut through everything else. I grabbed the door handle and pulled with all my strength. Locked. The impact from whatever had caused the accident must have jammed the mechanism. I yanked harder, again and again, my muscles screaming in protest, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at my throat. The flames were getting closer, the heat intensifying with every passing second. The window. I needed to break the window. I grabbed a large rock from the landscaping nearby and smashed it against the glass with all the force I could muster. The window exploded in a shower of crystal fragments that cut my hands and arms. But I didn't care. I didn't feel the pain. All I felt was the desperate need to get Caleb out before the flames reached him. I reached through the broken window, my arms getting sliced by the remaining shards of glass, and fumbled with the car seat buckle. My hands were slippery with blood, making it hard to grip anything. "Please, God, please," I prayed through gritted teeth. The heat was unbearable now. The flames so close, I could feel them singeing the hair on my arms. The metal buckle burned my fingers, but I kept working it, kept pressing and pulling, until finally, it clicked open. I grabbed Caleb and pulled him through the window opening, careful not to let the glass cut him, and we collapsed onto the grass, 20 feet away from the vehicle. Caleb clung to me, his small body shaking violently, his face buried in my shoulder as he sobbed. "You're safe, baby," I whispered, holding him tight, despite the pain in my bleeding hands. "You're safe now. I've got you." Seconds later, the gas tank exploded with a deafening boom that shook the ground beneath us. Flames shot into the sky, black smoke billowing in thick clouds. If I had been even 30 seconds slower, Caleb would have burned alive. Miss Phyllis crawled over to us. tears streaming down her weathered face, and pulled Caleb from my arms. She held him and sobbed, rocking back and forth. "Thank you," she kept saying over and over. "Oh God, thank you. You saved him. You saved my baby." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Paramedics arrived first, then firefighters, then police. They wrapped Caleb in a blanket and checked him over, while another paramedic treated my hands, picking glass out of my palms and wrapping them in gauze. The cuts were deep, but not life-threatening. I would heal. That's what mattered. 2 days later, there was a knock on the door of the tiny apartment I shared with Grandma. I opened it to find a tall man in an expensive suit, standing there, his presence somehow both commanding and gentle. "Nalani Brooks?" he asked. "Yes?" "My name is Elijah Harrington. Caleb is my son." He looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed, like he had been crying, and his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "You saved my son's life. I watched the security footage from the parking lot. You ran toward a burning car when everyone else was running away. You risked your life without hesitation for a child who wasn't even yours." I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how shabby my apartment must look to someone like him, someone who clearly had more money than I could imagine. "I just did what anyone would do," I said quietly. "No." His voice was firm, almost harsh in its intensity. "Most people wouldn't. Most people would have called 911 and waited. Most people would have been too afraid or too concerned with their own safety. You didn't hesitate. You ran toward danger to save my child, and I will never forget that." He handed me a thick envelope, the kind you see in movies. Inside was a check that made my hands start shaking. $50,000. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. "I can't accept this," I stammered. "It's too much. I didn't do it for money." "I know you didn't," Elijah said gently. "That's exactly why you deserve it. Please, let me do this. Let me give you something that might make your life a little easier. You gave me my son back. This is the least I can do." I took the check with trembling hands, tears blurring my vision. $50,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life, more than Grandma and I made in 2 years combined. It was enough to pay off her medical bills from her diabetes treatments, enough to fix the leaking roof and the broken heater, enough to breathe without constantly drowning in worry about money. "If you ever need anything," Elijah said, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket and pressing it into my bandaged hand, "anything at all, you call me directly. I mean it. You are part of my family now, whether you realize it or not." I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that my cousin Simone had been watching from across the street that entire day. She had come by to borrow money from Grandma, something she did regularly, and had seen the whole thing unfold. Watched as I pulled Caleb from the burning car. Watched as the ambulances arrived and the reporters showed up. Watched as Elijah Harrington knocked on our door 2 days later and handed me that envelope. Simone, who had always resented that Grandma loved me more, that people gravitated toward me, despite having nothing, while she struggled for attention, despite her beauty and charm. Simone, who had dropped out of college after 1 semester and burned through 3 jobs in 2 years because she couldn't handle being told what to do. Simone, who smiled at family dinners and holidays while whispering cruel things in my ear when no one else could hear. "You think you're special, Nalani? You think people actually care about you? They don't. They just feel sorry for you because you're pathetic." I always ignored her, always brushed off her comments, as jealousy or her way of dealing with her own insecurities. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was cashing that check without understanding that money changes everything, including the people around you. Because the moment I deposited that $50,000 into my account, Simone started planning how to take everything I had, planning how to destroy me so completely that no one would ever believe my version of events. The first betrayal came quietly, like a snake sliding through grass. It started 3 weeks after I cashed the check. I had used the money responsibly, paying off Grandma's hospital bills first, then fixing the apartment's roof and replacing the ancient heater that barely worked. I put the rest in savings for emergencies, determined not to waste this blessing. Life felt lighter, manageable for the first time in years. Then I came home one evening, after my shift at the daycare, to find Simone sitting on Grandma's couch, looking perfectly comfortable and welcome. "Hey, cousin," she said with a smile that was too sweet, too practiced. "Long time no see." Grandma was in the kitchen cooking dinner, humming an old gospel song, completely content. She always lit up when Simone visited, even though those visits were rare and usually involved asking for money. "Didn't know you were stopping by," I said carefully, setting my bag down and watching Simone's face for any hint of what she was really doing here. "Just wanted to check on Auntie. And you, of course." Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you came into some money recently. Pretty impressive, saving that rich kid." My stomach tightened with instinctive wariness. "How did you hear about that?" "People talk, Nalani. You know how it is. Word gets around, especially when it involves billionaires and dramatic rescues. I'm proud of you, really. You deserve good things." But her tone suggested otherwise, carrying an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. Over the next few weeks, Simone started showing up more frequently, always when I was at work, always spending time alone with Grandma. "She's been so helpful lately," Grandma told me one evening while we were washing dishes. "Helped me organize all my medical papers and bills, even took me to the bank to set up a new savings account with better interest rates. Isn't that sweet of her?" Ice shot through my veins. "Ah, what new account, Grandma? What paperwork did you sign?" "Oh, just some bank forms, baby. Nothing complicated." Simone explained everything real clear, said it would help my money grow faster. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. "I need to see those papers right now." "They're at the bank, sweetheart." Simone kept copies for her records, said she'd help me keep track of everything. Of course she did. I called Simone's phone 20 times that night. Every call went straight to voicemail, and she didn't return a single one. The next morning, I was at the bank when the doors opened, my heart pounding with dread. The manager, Mr. Phillip, was a kind man in his 50s who had known Grandma for 15 years. "I need to check my grandmother's account immediately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and failing. He frowned, pulling up the information on his computer. "I'm sorry, Miss Brooks, but according to our records, you're no longer listed as an authorized user on that account." "What? That's impossible. I've been on that account since I was 18. Grandma added me herself. The account was updated 3 weeks ago. Your grandmother came in with her niece and requested the changes. Only Simone Brooks has access now." The room spun. I gripped the edge of his desk to steady myself. "How much money is currently in the account?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Miss Brooks, I really shouldn't disclose that information since you're not authorized anymore." "Please," I begged, not caring how desperate I sounded. "I need to know." He sighed heavily and glanced at his screen again. His face went pale. "The account was emptied 2 days ago." transferred to an external account in full. $47,000. Gone. Every penny Grandma had saved over her entire lifetime of backbreaking work, plus the money I had contributed from my own savings over the years. All of it vanished into Simone's hands like it had never existed. I stumbled out of the bank, into the bright morning sunlight, my mind reeling. That's when I realized she had planned it all from the very beginning. Watching from across the street that day hadn't been coincidence. She had been planning to ask Grandma for money, had seen the accident happen, had seen Elijah Harrington show up at our door, and she had immediately started scheming about how to take advantage of the situation. I confronted Grandma that evening, spreading the bank statements across our kitchen table with trembling hands. She stared at the papers with confusion clouding her eyes, her weathered fingers touching the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Simone said this new account would help us. She said the interest rates were better. Grandma, she transferred all the money to her own account. She stole from you. From us." Tears filled Grandma's eyes, and seeing her cry broke something inside me. "But she's family, Nalani. She wouldn't do that to us. There must be some mistake, some explanation." "There's no mistake." I pulled out my phone and called Simone's number again, putting it on speaker so Grandma could hear. This time, she answered on the third ring. "Oh, hey, Nalani," she said casually, like we were old friends catching up. "What's up?" "You stole from Grandma. I want that money returned to her account today, or I'm calling the police." Silence for a moment, then laughter. Not nervous laughter or guilty laughter, but genuine amusement. "Stole? That's a pretty strong accusation, cousin. I just helped Auntie move her money somewhere safer, somewhere it could actually grow, instead of sitting in that outdated account earning nothing." "You moved it to your personal account, Simone. That's theft. Look, Nalani, Auntie's getting old. Her memory isn't what it used to be. She needed someone responsible handling her finances, and you've been so busy with your little daycare job and everything. I figured I'd step up and help the family. Isn't that what family does?" The casual cruelty in her voice was staggering. "I want that money back by end of business today, or I'm filing a police report." "Can't do that, I'm afraid. Already invested most of it in some opportunities that are going to pay off big. But don't you worry about Auntie. I'll take good care of her. Probably better than you ever could on your pathetic salary." "You can't." "Oh, and Nalani?" Her voice dropped low, taking on a cold edge that made my blood freeze. "If you even think about going to the cops, I'll make sure everyone knows the real story. How you manipulated a confused old woman into signing over that Harrington money. How you've been controlling her finances and keeping her isolated. She's old, her mind's slipping, and I have signed documents proving she trusted me, not you. Who do you think people will believe? The concerned niece trying to protect her elderly aunt, or the girl who suddenly came into money and is being accused of elder abuse?" The line went dead. I stood there with the phone in my hand, rage and helplessness warring in my chest, while Grandma cried softly at the table. But Simone wasn't finished destroying my life. Not even close. The second wave of betrayal hit. At church, 2 Sundays later, Bishop Freeman's congregation at First Light Baptist had been my second home since childhood. Every Sunday morning, Grandma and I sat in the third pew from the front, the same spot we had occupied for over 15 years. The people there knew me, had watched me grow up, had celebrated my graduation, and supported me through my mother's death. Or at least, I thought they did. I walked into service that Sunday, to find Simone sitting right beside Grandma in our usual spot, dressed in an elegant outfit that must have cost more than my monthly rent. She waved at me with a bright smile, all warmth and family affection for anyone watching. I ignored her and sat on Grandma's other side, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The service proceeded normally until Bishop Freeman called for testimonies, inviting anyone who felt moved to share their blessings and struggles with the congregation. Simone stood up gracefully, smoothing her expensive dress. "I want to thank God this morning," she began, her voice soft and earnest, in a way that made my skin crawl, "for giving me the strength and wisdom to help my family in their time of need." Approving murmurs rippled through the congregation. People nodded, already drawn in by her performance. "My cousin Nalani recently came into some money," she continued, gesturing toward me with what looked like genuine affection. "Money she earned by being a hero, by saving a child's life in a terrible accident. We're all so incredibly proud of her for that brave act." More murmurs of approval. I felt eyes turning toward me, some curious, some admiring. But with that blessing came some unexpected challenges. Sometimes when people who aren't used to having money suddenly get it, it changes them in ways they don't recognize. The money made her suspicious of everyone, even family members who only want to help. She's accused me of terrible, hurtful things that simply aren't true. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I've tried so hard to be there for her, and for Auntie Cecile, to help them manage this blessing wisely. But Nalani has pushed me away, shut me out completely. She's become angry and paranoid, seeing enemies where there are only people who love her. Simone's voice cracked with emotion, and she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her purse. "I just ask all of you to keep her in your prayers during this difficult time. Sometimes blessings can become burdens if we let them poison our hearts and relationships. Pray that she finds peace and learns to trust family again." She sat down to a wave of sympathy, hands reaching out to pat her shoulder and murmur words of comfort and support. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's not what happened. She's lying. She stole. Sister Nalani." Bishop Freeman's voice was gentle, but carried unmistakable authority. "This isn't the appropriate time or place for confrontation. We can discuss this after service in my office if you'd like, but right now, we're in the middle of worship." The implicit message was clear. Sit down and be quiet. I looked around at the faces of people I had known my entire life. Sister Marlene, who had taught my Sunday school class. Brother Jerome, who had given me rides to church when Grandma was sick. Deacon Williams, who had helped pay for my mother's funeral. All of them were looking at me with varying degrees of concern and disappointment, like I was a problem child acting out. None of them were looking at Simone with suspicion. I walked out of the sanctuary, my vision blurred with tears of rage and humiliation. Outside in the parking lot, I leaned against my car and tried to breathe through the panic attack squeezing my chest. "Nalani, baby." I looked up to see Sister Marlene approaching, her face arranged in an expression of pity. "I know, things must be hard for you right now, adjusting to having money and all the complications that brings, but you can't let it poison your heart against family. Simone is just trying to help. She stole $47,000 from my grandmother's bank account," I said flatly. "She manipulated Grandma into signing papers and then emptied the account into her own name." Sister Marlene's face hardened slightly. "That's a very serious accusation, young lady. Do you have actual proof of theft? Or are you just upset because you're not in control of the money anymore?" "I have bank statements showing." Because Simone showed several of us the paperwork from the bank. Your grandmother signed those forms willingly, with witnesses present. Legal documents transferring account authority. Maybe you're just having trouble accepting that your grandmother trusted someone else to help her for once, instead of putting everything on your shoulders. I stared at her, betrayal tasting like ash in my mouth. You don't believe me. I believe you're going through something difficult, and I think you should consider talking to a professional, someone who can help you work through these feelings of anger and paranoia before they damage your relationships beyond repair. We're all worried about you, sweetheart. She patted my arm in a way that felt condescending rather than comforting and walked back toward the church. I sat in my car and watched people file out after the service ended, watched them hug Simone and offer her words of encouragement for dealing with her difficult cousin. That's when I fully understood what she had done. Simone hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my reputation, my community, my credibility. She had positioned herself as the hero and me as the villain, and she had done it so skillfully that no one questioned her version of events. But she wasn't finished. The third wave of betrayal came in the form of an eviction notice, taped to the door of Grandma's apartment when I came home from work on a Tuesday evening. I ripped it down with shaking hands and read the formal legal language that basically said we had 30 days to get out of the home Grandma had lived in for 30 years. Due to non-payment of rent for 3 consecutive months, you are required to vacate the premises within 30 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action and forcible removal. Grandma. I rushed inside, my heart hammering. Did you pay the rent these past few months? She looked up from her knitting, confusion evident on her weathered face. Of course I did, baby. Simone's been handling all the bills for me since she set up that new account. She said it would be easier if everything went through her. That way, I wouldn't have to worry about remembering due dates, with my memory being what it is. No, 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 no. I called our landlord, Mr. Greaves, immediately. He was a decent man who had known Grandma for decades and had always been fair with us. Mr. Greaves, it's Nalani Brooks. We just got an eviction notice, but there must be some mistake. My grandmother has been paying rent. I'm sorry, Miss Brooks, but the rent hasn't been paid since March. I've sent multiple notices to the email address on file, but I never received any response. I've been more than patient, but I can't let this go on any longer. What email address? My voice came out strangled. Let me check here. It's simonebrooksrentals@gmail.com. That was updated as the primary contact about 2 months ago when Simone came by the office to handle some paperwork for your grandmother. Of course it was. Of course Simone had covered every angle, had made sure that any warnings or notices went to her instead of us, so we wouldn't know what was happening until it was too late to fix it. Mr. Greaves, please. My grandmother has lived here for 30 years. She's never missed rent before. Simone has been stealing from us, manipulating everything. There has to be something we can do. He sighed heavily, and I could hear the genuine regret in his voice. I'm sorry, I truly am. But I've already been far more patient than I should have been, given the amount owed. The back rent totals $12,000. If that amount is paid in full by the end of this month, I can halt the eviction. Otherwise, I have no choice but to proceed. $12,000. I had maybe $800 left from the money Elijah had given me. The rest having gone to Grandma's medical bills and apartment repairs. I tried everything over the next week, applied for personal loans, and was denied due to insufficient credit history. Tried to set up payment plans with Mr. Greaves, But the property management company he worked for wouldn't allow it. Begged Simone on voicemail messages that she never returned. Nothing worked. On the 28th day, I sat on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and I cried. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Grandma sat down beside me with difficulty, her arthritic knees creaking, and put her frail hand on my shoulder. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered, though her own voice was thick with tears. "We've been through worse than this. We'll figure it out together." But I didn't see how. We were about to be homeless. Our money was gone. Our community had turned against us, and the person responsible for all of it was walking around free without any consequences. That night, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, too exhausted for whatever fresh disaster might be waiting. But something made me pick up. "Hello? Nalani Brooks?" A woman's voice, professional and cold, with the kind of efficiency that suggested she made hundreds of similar calls. "Yes, this is she. This is Claire Whitmore, executive assistant to Elijah Harrington. Mr. Harrington has requested your presence at a celebration dinner this Saturday evening at 8 p.m. The event will be held at the Harrington estate. A car will be sent to pick you up at 7:30. Formal attire is required." I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a moment. "Wait, what? Why would he want me there?" "I'm simply delivering the message as instructed, Miss Brooks. The car will arrive at 7:30. Please be ready." She hung up before I could ask any more questions. I sat there staring at my phone, my mind racing. Elijah Harrington, the man who had promised to help me if I ever needed anything, was inviting me to some kind of formal dinner at his mansion. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was my chance to explain everything that had happened, to ask for his help, to get the support I desperately needed to fight back against Simone and save Grandma from losing her home. Hope flickered in my chest, for the first time in weeks, fragile but real. I had no idea I was walking straight into a trap, carefully designed to destroy whatever remained of my dignity and reputation. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a blur of anxiety and desperate preparation. I borrowed a simple navy dress from Janelle at the daycare, the nicest thing either of us owned that might be appropriate for a billionaire's estate. I practiced what I would say to Elijah, how I would explain the situation without sounding desperate or crazy. On Saturday evening, the car that arrived was nothing like I expected. It was sleek and black, the kind of luxury vehicle I had only seen in movies, with leather seats and tinted windows. The driver was professional and silent, opening the door for me without a word. As we drove through the city and out toward the estates on the northern edge, my nervousness grew. The Harrington estate sat on 20 pristine acres of manicured grounds. As we pulled up the long, tree-lined driveway, I saw it in all its glory. A sprawling mansion that looked like something from a European palace, lit up like a jewel against the darkening sky. Fountains danced in the circular driveway, and I could see guests in glittering gowns and perfectly tailored suits moving through the massive front doors. My borrowed dress suddenly felt even more inadequate, and panic started to claw at my throat. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered to myself, but the driver had already parked, and a valet was opening my door. "Welcome to the Harrington estate," he said politely, gesturing toward the entrance. I climbed out on shaking legs and walked toward those massive doors, feeling every eye on me, feeling like an imposter who had stumbled into a world where she didn't belong. Inside, the ballroom took my breath away despite my anxiety. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played classical music in one corner, while waiters in crisp uniforms glided through the crowd with trays of champagne in crystal flutes. The guests were all wealthy, powerful people who moved with the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or status. Nalani. I turned to find Elijah Harrington standing there, tall and imposing, in a perfectly cut tuxedo, a champagne flute in his hand. But something was wrong. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and there was a coldness in his posture that made my instincts scream warnings. Mr. Harrington, thank you so much for inviting me. I really need to talk to you about something important that's been happening. Later, he interrupted smoothly, his voice pleasant but dismissive. First, let's get you a drink, and you can enjoy the party. He gestured vaguely toward the crowd and started to turn away. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that something was very, very wrong. Before I could press the issue, a woman's voice rang out across the ballroom. Elijah, darling, there you are. Mrs. Victoria Harrington swept toward us like a queen approaching her subjects, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than every house in the Eastbrook projects combined. Her gaze landed on me and went cold, assessing me like I was an insect that had somehow found its way into her pristine home. And who is this? Her tone made it clear I was unwelcome. A guest, Elijah said simply, his voice devoid of warmth. I see. Her lips curved into a smile that held no humor. How unexpected. She turned away, dismissing my existence entirely, and moved back into the crowd. The next hour was pure torture. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, clutching a glass of water I couldn't drink, my stomach churning with anxiety, watching the wealthy guests laugh and dance and celebrate whatever they were celebrating. I searched desperately for an opportunity to talk to Elijah privately, to explain about Simone and the stolen money and the eviction, but he seemed to deliberately avoid the areas where I stood. That's when I saw her, and the world tilted sideways. Simone stood near the center of the ballroom, laughing with a group of elegantly dressed women, wearing an emerald green designer gown that must have cost thousands of dollars. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless, her jewelry expensive and tasteful. She looked like she had always belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and she smiled at me. Not a friendly smile, not even a triumphant smile. A predator's smile, the look of someone who has already won and is simply enjoying watching their prey realize how completely they've been trapped. She excused herself from her group and walked toward me with deliberate, unhurried steps, her champagne flute held like a weapon. Nalani. What a surprise seeing you here, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, her voice full of false warmth. What are you doing here, Simone? I hissed, keeping my voice low. Oh, didn't you know? I've been working with the Harrington family for the past 2 months as a consultant for their charitable foundation. Mrs. Harrington is such a visionary, and working with her has been absolutely incredible. My blood turned to ice as the pieces clicked into place. You planned this, all of it? Planned what? Her eyes widened with theatrical innocence. I'm just here doing my job. But you, why are you here? This is a private event for the family's closest friends and business associates. Did someone actually invite you? Or did you just show up uninvited, like you've been showing up in their lives? Before I could respond, the lights in the ballroom suddenly dimmed. A spotlight appeared, illuminating the center of the room like a stage. My heart started pounding with dread. Mrs. Harrington stood in that circle of light, a microphone in her perfectly manicured hand. her face arranged in a gracious smile. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight to celebrate my son Elijah's engagement to the lovely and accomplished Gabrielle Monroe. We're so blessed to have such wonderful friends and family here to share this joyous occasion." Applause erupted around the room. A stunning woman in a white designer gown stepped into the spotlight beside Mrs. Harrington, and Elijah joined them, placing his arm around the woman's waist. So this was an engagement party. That's why I had been invited, though I still couldn't understand why. But before we toast the happy couple, Mrs. Harrington continued, her voice taking on a sharp edge that cut through the celebratory atmosphere, "I need to address an unfortunate situation that has come to my attention." My stomach dropped as the spotlight suddenly swung away from the happy couple and landed directly on me, blinding and exposing. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me like I was an exhibit in a zoo. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand frozen in that horrible circle of light. "This girl," Mrs. Harrington announced, her diamond-covered finger pointing at me like an accusation, "broke into my home earlier this afternoon. She attacked members of my household staff, destroyed property, and made wild, delusional claims about my family. Security escorted her off the premises, but apparently she has returned uninvited, somehow managing to infiltrate this private celebration." "That's not true," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation and disbelief. "I didn't break in. Your assistant called me and invited me here. I have done nothing wrong. Security found her trespassing on the grounds this afternoon." Mrs. Harrington continued smoothly, ignoring my protests completely, as if I hadn't spoken at all. "We showed mercy and didn't contact the police at that time. Clearly, that was a mistake on our part, showing compassion to someone who clearly needs professional mental health intervention." "Oh," the crowd murmured, whispers spreading like disease through the assembled guests. I could see phones being pulled out, people recording this public humiliation for their social media feeds. "She has been obsessed with my family," Mrs. Harrington said, her voice taking on a tone of pity that was somehow worse than anger. "Ever since we politely declined to continue our association with her following a regrettable incident involving my grandson several months ago. She has been making increasingly unhinged claims, harassing my staff, and apparently she has now escalated to breaking into private property and crashing exclusive events where she clearly does not belong." "What? No. I saved your grandson's life," I screamed, no longer caring how I sounded. "His car caught fire, and I pulled Caleb out. I have scars on my hands from the glass. Ask Elijah. Tell them the truth." I spun toward Elijah, desperate, pleading, my entire world collapsing around me. Our eyes met across the ballroom, and in that moment, I saw the truth written clearly in his expression. The emptiness, the calculation, the decision that had already been made long before I ever walked through those doors tonight. He stepped forward into the spotlight with me, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I don't know this woman," he said without hesitation, without a flicker of recognition or remorse. "I have never seen her before in my life, and she certainly never saved my son. This is clearly a disturbed individual who has constructed an elaborate fantasy." The room exploded into chaos, gasps of shock, nervous laughter, cameras flashing like lightning. Security guards appeared at my sides before I could even process what was happening, their hands gripping my arms with bruising force. "Wait, please, he's lying. I have proof," I screamed as they dragged me backward toward the doors. "I saved Caleb. The nanny knows. Miss Phyllis was there. Someone call her, please." But no one was listening. The last thing I saw before they hauled me out of that ballroom was Simone standing beside Mrs. Harrington, near the champagne fountain, her crystal flute raised in a silent, mocking toast, directly at me, her smile sharp and victorious and cruel. Then the massive doors slammed shut behind me, cutting off the light and the warmth and any hope I had left, and I was alone in the cold darkness with nothing but the sound of rain beginning to fall.